Welcome back to Chaos Corner. It's your old buddy, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, and I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this. Same day coverage, live to tape for show number 38 from down here in the bunker, 20 feet below the surface of the earth. You see, we have the music on, we're chilling, we're chillaxing, we're laid back, if you will. What we're going to cover here today on show number 38 is going to be the continuation of a complete idiot's guide to pro wrestling. Now, fans, if you went back to show number 37 and 36, you'll see that we covered the first couple of chapters and the sidebars. Well, that's what we're going to do today. We left off on the last show talking about the introduction to television to the world of pro wrestling. Now, fans, I'll say that to say this. I want you to stay here for this show. We're going to go for at least an hour. We have a lot to delve into with the world of professional wrestling and the world of television. So don't forget to follow me on all social media platforms at Big Daddy G.O.C. And the G.O.C. stands for the Guardian of Chaos. Hit the profile link. That will kick you over here to Guardian of Chaos on YouTube. Now, of course, follow me at Big Daddy Guardian of Chaos, at Big Daddy G.O.C., at the Guardian of Chaos. You get the gist. That's on Twitter. That's on YouTube. That's on Instagram. That's on Facebook. That's on Gab, which will be back, and Parler, which will be back. It's on all social media platforms. And don't forget on Twitch and D Live. And don't forget as well to follow my boys over at the show, and that's at Mario_Chaos. If you're not following them, to put yourself over for your brand, your podcast, whatever it is that you're trying to do, I have to be honest, I don't know what to tell you. Stay here. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're down here in the bunker. The sun is out. It's me, the G.O.C. Don't you dare miss it. All right, fans. We're back here to cover the continuation of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Pro Wrestling by Bert, Randolph Sugar, and Captain Lou Albano. Written back in 1999 is when this was published. If you're not out reading this and covering this from Alpha Books, I don't know what to tell you. This is the history of pro wrestling that dates back to the 18th century into the 19th century. We are up now into the 40s, into the 50s, in the introduction of the world of professional wrestling into television. So that's what we're going to cover here today on show number 38, live to tape, same day coverage from the bunker with your buddy, the G.O.C. I think I said that already. Listen, we're only a few minutes in. This is the opening monologue, but we're going to delve right into it fast. Let me give a big shout out to my boy over at sweetheel.com, and that would be Mr. Hempelstiltskin. If you're not following Mr. Hempelstiltskin on social media, and if you're not going to sweetheelcbd.com, or let me be corrected, sweetheel.com, I don't know what the heck you're doing. It's for all your CBD needs. It's for wellness. It's for wellness in life. It's for anti-anxiety. It's for inflammation. It's just for overall wellness. Athletes now in all the 4 and 5 major sports are using them. I wouldn't attach my name to it if it didn't work. Remember that. And I don't have to tell you. I say it every time. I have it on multiple spots all over my body. You take the little tincture before you go to bed. You don't have to have any pills, anything like that. All legally licensed and grown in the Constitution state. Support your small streamers, support your local entrepreneurs, support your people like the Guardian of Chaos and Sweet Heel CBD. You can't go wrong. Yeah, I get it. I'm going to lower the solar. There's always a heckler. Since the weather's a little bit better, we're at the beginning of a week on a Monday. We're coming out of the Elimination Chamber last night, which I have to be honest with you, I'll do my notes and my research later. But I didn't watch it. I do know that what came out of it is that The Miz, and listen, no disrespect to The Miz, he's made his way in his business, but his character for me just doesn't work anymore, and he's the champion now. All roads lead to WrestleMania? I'm not sure. Speaking of WrestleMania, on the horizon at Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling locally here in the shadows of Titan Towers, Dieselmania 5 will be coming up soon. But with that being said, this Saturday, is Alley Fights down at the PAPW training facility. All you have to do is go out to ParadiseAlleyProWrestling.com. You'll see all the information, and the legendary Paradise 4 have an event for Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling this weekend, this Saturday at Alley Fights, and all the stars are going to be there at PAPW. I don't have to run them down for you. You know who they are. Go out and do your research. But that's part of my opening monologue, and yes, the chains are still on, because you see, whether it's here in this state or across the country and across the world, there's a lot of things ever changing in politics and life, the economy, social justice. I allude to it every show just to give you my opinion, that I don't have my head under a rock. My head's not buried in the sand. I know what I'm talking about, or I wouldn't speak on it. No propaganda, no BS, reality and what's coming. So again, I continue to implore everyone out there that's watching here for a little seriousness before we get on to covering a Complete Idiot's Guide. Stay in faith, stay with your family, stay with like-minded people, protect yourself, believe in who you are, surround yourself with people that are like-minded like you, and everything's going to be okay. As far as this pandemic and the vaccine and where everything's going from there, I'm not here to really talk about that. I'll throw little snippets here and there and give you information about things that I may know or have researched. But we all have our own independent thoughts. So before we delve on here, I'm going to take a little break. Instead of doing it early, if you remember on show number 37, I don't think I took a break at all. I'm feeling pretty good today as far as the cough and the weather. I got the red Solo cup. No dead air today because their solar energy's been cranked up. So if I take my break early, I'm good, and we don't have to worry about it. And then once we get up to around 10 minutes in, we get past the monologue and all the different things that I like to throw out there, whether it be I'll say that to say this, don't you dare miss it. You get the gist. This is why we have the solar before it runs out. That's why, for as much as I like it and I'm behind it, it's a supporter system. It's like being in those movies, and if you know what I'm talking about, the AVNs or whatever, it's like having a fluffer. You know, I try to keep this show PG, but the solar power and all that, when compared to nuclear and diesel and fossil fuels and all that, it's really just like being a fluffer. Backstage, if you know what I'm talking about. I know that most of my crowd does by looking at the analytics and the demographics. So we're going to have a lot of fun here. I've broken out once again the old Big Daddy regalia, which used to be a 4X, and so I'm trying to stay in training and keep the weight off, because who knows what's going to happen? Who knows where you're going to appear? Who knows when the pandemic is going to break up, vaccines, all that. It's a lot of controversy taking care of other countries before the United States of America. It's supposed to be America first. I know we're supposed to be humanitarians and all that, and I don't want to get onto this soapbox, but I'm taking a break, so I try to break it up and not just give you wrestling here. I try to give you everything, but no propaganda, no BS, and not trying to change anybody's mind or sway anybody. That's not what I do here. You believe what you believe. You listen to what you listen to. You like what you like. And if you don't like it here, then, kick rocks. Cheers. Speaking of cheers, I think they're back and they've recovered from Mardi Gras. I believe that Juliet Miranda from Bourbon Soak Live and her husband David, the producer, and of course the Unwritable Rant podcast, I think they're back tonight for Bourbon Soak Live on YouTube. And if you want to listen to great stories, road stories, and about the music industry and just life in general, David, the producer, and his wife Juliet, first off, she's easy on the eyes, but they're incredible writers, incredible people from down there, and they're Big Easy, and they put out an entertaining program every night, Monday night, and that's tonight on YouTube. So I think I'll be checking that out, along with, I guess I'll tune in briefly for Raw to get whatever happened to fall out from the Elimination Chamber last night. I will certainly be checking in with WWAB Wrestling with Anything But with Avi Klein. I believe tonight might be the preview and review show on Facebook Live. I don't think Ken Patera's segment starts till March. All right, fans, deep breath. 10 minutes in, we are delving into after that monologue, a complete idiot's guide to the world of pro wrestling fans. This is legit as they get. I know there's a lot of books out there. The market is flooded with all kinds of autobiographies, biographies, fiction, nonfiction, when it comes to the world of pro wrestling. That's what I do here as part of Chaos Corner, besides covering the big time of AEW and WWE and NXT and Raw and SmackDown and the MLW and Ring of Honor and Impact and New Japan, the NWA. So I cover all that stuff, but I like to have trivia. I like to try to get some people down here that I can trust, that can get down into the bunker. And speaking of the bunker, I did a test through certain things to see the power of the Wi-Fi down here. And it's not as bad as I thought. Still some interruptions, but up in Chaos Quarter headquarters, unbelievable the amount of power that's surging through the Ponderosa here. So we're hoping to look forward to no more technical issues. But we're going to start off the week here on a Monday. Show number 38, live to tape. The music is down, no heckling. Let me get this out of the way first. We ended off day before yesterday's show, because we did 3 in a row, with wrestling and breaking into television. And that's where I want to go now. Don't be distracted by the halls, but when you're on the pipes, you're the golden smog. This is my money maker. Do you understand? You got to take care of it. You want to get this for me? No? It's okay. Okay, here we go. This is where we left off on the last show. As the world of professional wrestling goes into television, I said it 15 times. What I want to talk about quickly before we get into that is a list right here that I had put aside that I didn't get into the last show. Live to tape, same day coverage, Chaos Corner. Former football players who became wrestlers. And of course, remember the time frame here, 1999, 2000. We're in 2021, so since then, of course, there's been a lot of football players that have gotten into the world of professional wrestling. Whether it's Steve Mongo McMichael or who recently passed away, the Hall of Famer Kevin Green. So we're going to talk about that. Before we get on to TV, and then we're going to do the sidebars as we usually do. Captain Lou's Corner, Bert's Corner, In Your Face, WrestleMania, all the different sidebars. So here we go with a list of players and the universities and their ring names. It's just a short list, and we'll breeze right through it. Jack Atkinson, and I know the Atkinson. You people out there know this name, and you're not even sure how you know the name, whether you're a casual or whether you're an insider. Bring the chains back, because we're just starting. Atkinson, the name. Anybody? I'll start this early. Bueller? Anyone? Jack Atkinson, a.k.a. Fritz Von Erich, the Von Erich boys. And he went to SMU, Southern Methodist University. So how about that? He went on to be one of the best wrestlers of all time. What a heel, Fritz Von Erich. Richard Athlas, a.k.a. Dick the Bruiser, University of Nevada. Mike DiBiase, the University of Nebraska. Dory Funk Jr., West Texas State. I always talk about the connection between West Texas State and the world of pro wrestling, and the tough son of a bitches that came out of the state of Texas that have gone on to the world of pro wrestling. Terry Funk, West Texas State. Vern Gagne, the University of Minnesota. Bob Geigel, University of Iowa. Bill Goldberg, the University of Georgia. Kevin Green, who we just mentioned, may he rest in peace, Auburn University. Herman Hickman, the University of Tennessee. Curtis Ayukea, a.k.a. King Curtis, Pehea Oi Melehini Kane, Aloha and Mahalo at the same time, a.k.a. King Curtis, California University. Walter Johnson, Los Angeles State. Alex Karras, who went on to the Detroit Lions fame and also was in the unbelievable true-to-life story of Gale Sayers in the movie Brian's Song with James Caan. An unbelievable movie that was. Alex Karras, University of Iowa. Chris Kemmerer, a.k.a. Babe Sharkey, Temple University. Gene Kiniski, University of Arizona. Ernie the Cat Ladd, who went on to play for the San Diego Chargers. Grambling University. Ed McDaniel, a.k.a. Wahoo, obviously went on to play for the New York Jets out of the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Bill Miller, Ohio State. Angelo Mosin, Notre Dame. Wayne Munn, a.k.a. Big Wayne Munn, University of Nebraska. Jumpin' Joe, Joe Savoldi back then, Jumpin' Joe, and we covered this in show number 37, Notre Dame University. And of course, on to Mario Savoldi in the legendary ICCW in the Northeast New England area and territory, which directly competed with the WWF, whether it be on Sports Channel, Sportsnet. There were a lot of things, if you remember that, in the early 90s. Wilbur Snyder, Utah. Arthur White, a.k.a. Tarzan White, University of Alabama. All the different folks, and again, we can go on to different guys that came in and just dabbled, were football players and came in and did some wrestling stuff, but weren't wrestlers, whether you want to talk about William the Refrigerator Perry or Bill Fralick or Lawrence Taylor. So you see that what's going on with all the different athletes. Listen, a lot of wrestlers wanted to be football players. A lot of football players wanted to be wrestlers. There's only a handful that have been able to transfer and be great at both. I mean, even Lex Luger, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. There's a lot of guys that have mixed both of them, including the beast incarnate, Brock Lesnar. And we'll get onto that on another show. I don't know how long we're going to take to cover this book. So when something big comes up, I mean, we're here on Monday. We have AEW Dynamite coming up this weekend, talking about mainstream stars and athletes. I mean, Shaq is in action. Shaquille O'Neal from the NBA. And Cody Rhodes this week. So there's a lot of things. Looking forward to another decent week of pro wrestling, if you will, sometimes sports entertainment. But we're not here for that. Let's move on to the task at hand. Speaking of football players and folks that have gone on to become professional wrestlers. Again, I can't implore you enough about the book here, A Complete Idiot's Guide. I could fit that mold. No? Leave a comment, subscribe, retweet. We're trying to grow the channel, all social media platforms, like I told you. Here's Captain Lou's Corner. Bronco Nagurski had not only led the Bears to 4 championships, but had been All-Pro 4 seasons. However, finding that the owner of the Bears, George Papa Bear Hallis, threw nickels around like manhole covers and that his efforts weren't being adequately rewarded, he opted instead for a wrestling career and became one of the biggest attractions of the 1930s. Bronco Nagurski. Listen, it's well known about Papa Bear. He certainly didn't want to pay anybody. And back then in the 30s, that's where we are. We're coming up into the 50s on this, and an introduction into television. Here we go. We said on the last episode that closing at World War II and wrestling was on the cusp of a monumental breakthrough, courtesy of a newfangled household appliance called television. Here we go. And if I get a little tongue-tied, you get it. There's no editing. It's unscripted. I don't slice it up. We're in the middle of winter. We're 20 feet below the surface here in the bunker. And I gotta keep everything moist. You're aware of that, right? We gotta have liquid beverage. Oh, by the way, there's always something on the grill or on the Barbie or in the oven or the crock pot here at Chaos Corner and upstairs in the headquarters, and then on the 3rd level, who knows what the hell's going on up there. But with that being said, wow, I think we might have a little filet later. I try to cut down on my red meat. I'm getting distracted here almost 20 minutes in. So we're on to television, but this is what you're here for. You're here for the entertainment part. It's not just about the knowledge. You're here for the Guardian of Chaos. At least I think so. Here we go. Down to the task at hand, as I always say. Television and professional wrestling were made for each other. Professional wrestling offered an almost made-for-television format, tailored to the dimensions of the TV tube. And in a symbiotic relationship, television offered wrestling an entirely new group of fans and fans-to-be. Soon, wrestling was being offered up from arena and studio alike almost every day of the week. and served on Fridays more times than fish. But the wrestling boom of the late 40s and early 1950s wouldn't have been possible had it not been for one man and one man only. A lot of you fans out there know that are regulars, that are my regular followers. That would be one, and go back and research it. School is in session. Gorgeous George. With Lana Turner, bleach blonde hair, and a bag full of gimmicks, including marching into the arena of the strains of pomp and circumstance, Gorgeous George always put on a show, having his formally attired valet spray the ring with an atomizer filled with perfume-scented disinfectant called, appropriately enough, George Number 4. Wearing his fur-trimmed robe and giving away Georgie pins to the crowd, Gorgeous George pins out of his hair, fans. Gorgeous George became wrestling's biggest ever draw. The man introduced as the human orchid, the toast of the coast, became wrestling's poster boy, and not incidentally, became wrestling's first pure performer. That's right, setting the stage for wrestling's all-new direction of showbiz. Do you see where it started? Do you see what television did? Do you see how it brought it on? And then years later, it took a little while, but what Vince McMahon Jr. did and where we are in 2021, that's why this book now is important as it was back then, and back into the 19th century is as important as it is in 2021. Let's go on to Bert's Corner. Originally seen at the Los Angeles Olympic Auditorium, Gorgeous George's fame spread throughout the country as his bouts were kinescoped and shown in over 50 TV markets, and his persona became the butt of jokes by Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Red Skelton, and many, many other famous luminaries. He even made an appearance on Queen for a Day. Gorgeous George was ahead of the boat, ahead of the curve, ahead of his time, and now you see where Ric Flair got a lot of his stuff from it, and other people in the business. I mean, it's just that simple. Let's move on here. Again, a brief history of wrestling. We're in the Complete Idiot's Guide. Oh, I got to tell you, I don't want to give it up, but I'm going to have to for now. All right, fans, we're back to the task at hand. Oh, it feels so good. The menthol lip, I'm telling you, if you're not, and I'm not trying to get them for a sponsor, I told you, I'm not asking anybody for anything. I do this out of passion, not only for me, for you. From that point on, speaking of Gorgeous George in the 50s and the Georgie pins and the whole transition and turn from pro wrestling into showbiz, from that point on, wrestling became wrestling, as hordes of masked men, high-stepping Germans, monocled lords, Indian chiefs, Arab chieftains, and all other manner of gimmicked-up wrestlers followed in Gorgeous George's wake as the wrestling we knew into the 70s and 80s and 90s. I mean, it's just that simple. The second golden age of wrestling had begun, considering that the first golden age, as we talked about in the last previous shows, were considered in Babe Ruth's era, Ed Strangler Lewis's era, that time frame of the early 20s and 30s. The last you need to know on this crazy world of pro wrestling. Soon, however, television, which had wrestling as mere filler, found other programming. Wrestling sank back into oblivion until the 1980s, as I just talked about, when promoter Vince McMahon found a way to use the media to his own advantage, and wrestling roared into its third golden age, one that is still, that we're still enjoying, as I just alluded to before I even got to the notes. The three eras of golden age of wrestling. You hear people talk about the golden era, the golden age. Well, you see it here. We're not going to get into pre-1900s into the 18th century, which really was a golden age, the original. If you want to be honest, back to Abe Lincoln, the 16 and 1700s, we've already learned that 3 out of the 4 faces of Mount Rushmore had wrestled or were wrestlers at one time. We've also learned that 6 of the 46 United States presidents had been pro wrestlers or wrestled at one time, including the former President Trump, who would be number 7, not necessarily as a wrestler, but he did get into the ring and is in the Hall of Fame. Again, this is the 3rd show I've asked it. I have the answer. WrestleMania 23 or 24 is anybody whoever gets to me first with that trivia question of which one was Trump. Not at his plazas, his hotels, which have been imploded, and people act like they have a boner because they brought down a building. What symbolism is that? Really? Get off it, move on, move forward, stay positive. Someone get back to me about where Trump was on 23 or 24. I'm even giving you the clue, and I will send you an official autographed 8x10 from yours truly in the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, class of 2019. So think about that. If it's worth it, you could throw darts on it. You could put it down in your own bunker. You could wipe your ass with it. You could put it in a frame. You could do whatever you want. But I am a man of my word. Get me your address. Email me at either place. Chaos Big Daddy, the number 2 at yahoo.com, or Chaos Big Daddy, the number 2 at gmail.com. Either way, you can get in touch with me, or on any one of my social medias, you can inbox me, because mine is all open and public. When you put a face to the product, you take responsibility and whatever flashback, lashback, praise, kudos that come with it. If not, don't put your face out there. So, as I talked about and alluded, 1920s, 1930s, the Babe Ruth era, even different people, Nagurski, we talked about Strangler Lewis, we talked about hookers, shooters, we talked about all that different stuff. And then they considered Gorgeous George in the 50s the second of the golden age, okay? And then, of course, here we go. Now this is the 3rd era with McMahon, and we're still in it, but I don't think there's been a 4th era. I really don't. Again, the least you need to know, I'm not going to repeat that, but I'll get on to this. And I'll say that to say this. While wrestling is one of the oldest sports in the world, it became Americanized through carnivals and barnstorms after the Civil War. Wrestling's high point as a sport came with 2 Frank Gotch, George Hackenschmidt matches, which we covered on the last show. Ed Strangler Lewis became wrestling's first superstar and still arguably the greatest wrestler in history. We covered that on show 37. Go back, fans. They're all here. I have over 700 videos on my channel. Abe Lincoln and George Washington, along with 4 other presidents, were wrestlers. I just spoke to that. I am ahead of the curve on this. I don't know what the hell happened. And it's not because I read the book 100 times. Gorgeous George was wrestling's first showman and changed wrestling forever. And just think of the people after him, whether it be superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, Jesse the Body Ventura. Where do you think everyone got this stuff from? Including yours truly. I'm older than I look. And no, someone commented on one of my social medias. They said, 46? No, I'm not 46. Let's get on to the task at hand. We're 28 minutes in. We are going to move on to Chapter 3. The glue that holds it all together, organizations and federations. And in this chapter, I'm going to bounce around. We'll always do the sidebars, as I talked about, which are the little snippets. I enjoy those. In this chapter, the organizations that make wrestling work, the history of promotion, and tele-savvy promoters, a la WrestleMania, cable, and pay-per-view. There he is. It doesn't get better than that. Well, speaking of that, how did you like the little, again, back in the day, not to get off the subject, we had the own Big Daddy doll and production and different artists and stuff like that. That wasn't too bad, huh? Did I trick you a little bit? Not too bad. Listen, that's at 320, 330 pounds. I got down to 205. I'm currently probably about 230 and ready to kick somebody's ass. No, I'm only kidding. It's a work, baby. It's a work. Here we go. Sit back. Class is back in session. Let me take another little sip. We're 30 minutes in here. A lot of great information. And I know this episode is a little different, this show. A little different than 37 and 36 because I was more delved into it. But again, I'm going to be back here almost daily, every other day. Turn on the notifications. You'll see when I'm here because I'm going to run through this whole book. Here we go. While the wrestlers are the stars of the show, the players, if you will, the organizations and federations that stage the matches are the basis of wrestling. Its very fabric, and have been since the beginning of wrestling. The organizations and federations of today are a natural outgrowth of the old-time promoters who turned the sport of wrestling into a form of mass entertainment. They are the ones who are responsible for promoting wrestling, publicizing it, and plotting its course. And one of these days, one of these shows here on Chaos Corner, we're going to talk about wrestling magazines and their importance to the business. And that's really in my era of how you got to know stars in other territories and promotions from around the world. Pro wrestling magazines. Remember now, as I move on forward, we're in the era of 1999, 2000, post 9/11. Bert Randolph Sugar, Captain Lou Albano, but it applies to today. But remember the historic time frame, as I said in the last couple of shows when we started covering this, Back to the Future. Today, there are two major organizations on the professional wrestling landscape, the World Wrestling Federation and World Championship Wrestling. And several smaller ones survive and thrive, and more appearing every week, or so it seems. Only the most hardcore fan can keep track of who is who and who belongs to which. You can't tell the players without a scorecard, and you have to update it all the time. And it's even more so in 2021, especially when we get out of this pandemic. Don't get me started on that, please. This chapter will give you an overview of promoters and their world, how they came into being, how they grew, and what stars they feature. And try to sort it out for you, too. That's what I'm going to try to do. I want to get off onto the first edition here of a Body Slam, the sidebar. I see a Bert's Corner in here. I see an In Your Face. I see another Captain Lou's Corner. So we're going to try to get through this. I really enjoy bringing this information to you, so I hope that you like that. And I had a lot of people send me and inbox me and email me about different books they want me to cover. So send me your suggestion. I have a full library here of Chaos Chronicles. And don't forget, we're going to start watch-alongs. And pretty soon, since I'm learning more and more, how dangerous is that? We're going to be live streaming and chatting and setting everything up. Okay. Here we go. I'll hold off on a Body Slam. Back about the time Father Adam first heard the stampede of the apple sellers, remember we talked about that in show 36, there were no organizations nor federations. There were only barnstormers, carnival operators, and just plain old hustlers who homesteaded areas, stalked out the territory, staked out the holding wrestling bouts there, and then held their bouts there. These early day Barnums of wrestling were con men, most of whom have shaken hands with the process server more than once. And that's what I've talked about. If you go back to my shoot interview on here on the channel from 1999 or 2000, where I talked about the worst part and the best part about the business. And the worst part about the business is that paragraph that I just relayed to you folks out here on Chaos Corner. And they were the forerunners of the wrestling promoter, the freelance entrepreneurs who roamed the landscape in the early 20th century. They had no more legal right to control a territory than claim a jumper, but they agreed among themselves to respect their territorial boundaries. Soon the countryside took on the look of a patchwork shed put together by drunken carpenters, as each territory abutted and sometimes even overran an already established one, as we talk about the territories here in Chaos Corner. Their ranks were filled with boxing promoters such as Jack Curley and Jess McMahon, ex-wrestlers such as Toots Mott and Ed Strangler Lewis, and promoters such as Jack Pfeiffer, who came straight into wrestling with no previous career stops along their way. Part of the problem even back to then. Excuse me, folks. Pardon me, please. Pardon the interruption. Wait. Isn't that a show on ESPN? No copyright infringement there. Okay. By the 1930s, the wrestling landscape was as depressed as the rest of the country. We talked about that in show number 37. The champions had the lifespans of mayflies, while matches were interminable, going on until the wee hours of the morning. Promoters were double-crossing what few attractions they still had, not to mention each other. Accordingly, crowds, with the notable exception of those who came out in droves to watch Jim Landis, wrestling's only consistent drawing card during that period of the 30s, had fallen off disastrously. Something had to be done, and fast. The promoters were barely earning enough to survive on. Promoter Toots Mott understood that wrestling fans would no longer stand for even the biggest name wrestler holding a headlock on an opponent for 5 minutes or more. He borrowed an idea from vaudeville, the blackouts, where acts lasted but a few minutes and gave wrestling fans more entertainment, bang for their buck, if you will, by imposing time limits of 10 or 15 minutes. That's what we said. Other innovations of the era included the introduction of character wrestlers, the good guy, the bad guy, rudo face, oppositions, and novelty acts like midget wrestling and women wrestlers. This is what we alluded to when we were talking about in the last show. Body slam sidebar, a word of warning to wrestling fans. Once you master the basics of the game, pick one of two major organizations from back then, the WWF or WCW, in the middle of the Monday Night Wars to keep track of. Trying to follow all the many organizations out there will only give you Excedrin headache number 38. There are just too many of them. Keep it straight. But you have to be on your game, and that's why you bring content to your fans. They're saying this over 20 years ago. Think how it is now in 2021. Think how it is now in 2021. Same thing, if not more so, especially before the COVID. And now once we start loosening up with all the different groups, I could talk about them right around in the whole Northeast, tri-state, New England area, from coast to coast and border to border. There are a lot of groups out there, and several major promotions. So if you're a talent, you can get out there. I'll tell you, the time is coming. Just like I had said before this, I alluded to it back in 2018, 2019, even 2017. So fans, if you're listening to me and paying attention and you've been following along on my social media and different platforms, remember, I've been on TV, national radio, international radio, different shows, podcasts with legends, with young stars. So I'd like to think I've learned a thing or two. That's the first heckle because you said, no, you didn't. That's what you said. I heard it. I could take the live heckle. Let's get back because we're really all over the place here. Oh, my Lord. We were talking about TV. We're talking about different things. We're talking about the invention of television. Here on show number 38, live to tape from the bunker, same day coverage. I appreciate it, fans. Stay tuned because we have a lot more content coming. More promoters got into the game as it became more viable. Rudy Dusek in Nebraska, Ed White in Chicago, Pinky George in Iowa, Tony Stretcher in Minnesota, Ray Frabini in California, Paul Jones in Atlanta, Leroy McGurk in Tulsa, Nick Gulas and Roy Welch in Nashville, Sam Mushnick in St. Louis, Morris Siegel in Houston, and Paul Bowser in Boston. It's like a meeting of Goodfellas or meeting of the Minds or the Mafia, like back in the old movie days, and all the promoters would get together at these conventions. Wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall of the legendary men right there to see what was going on back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, what leads into this era of what we know as professional wrestling? They weathered the tough times of the Depression and emerged into the sunshine of their eagerly awaited post-war boom. That's when wrestling suddenly found itself in a boom and on its own. This one courtesy of television. All of a sudden, the new golden age of wrestling had arrived, and the promoters were going to make sure they had the most of it. Okay, here we go. Most of the promoters formed an organization in 1948. Take out your notebooks, please. Pen, paper. However you want to do it, recording, videotape, whatever, however you want to do it. I'm a pen to paper guy. Most of the promoters found an organization in 1948 called the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, which covered the entire West Coast from Seattle to San Diego and included Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and almost the entire South, plus Mexico, Australia, and parts of Japan and Canada. But the NWA was an organization in name only. It was really a loosely knit confederation of promoters, most of whom were, in the words of Lou Thez, hypocrites and lowlifes who'd stage a dogfight if they thought it would draw money. Now, he's right about a lot of it. I tell it like it is. Apparently, Lou Thez did too. In his online book, Hooker, An Authentic Wrestler's Adventures Inside the Bizarre World of Pro Wrestling, you can get that at official Lou Thez webpage. Again, another book I implore you to go out and get. Thez recounts one NWA annual meeting where the membership had listened to a report from some self-important judge from Texas who had been brought in to mediate an internal dispute between two Texas promoters. The judge had obviously resolved the matter in a way to fatten his own pockets. Well, most people do, follow the money. I say it all the time. And at the end of this report, one promoter stood up and said, well, this guy looks like the type who'd steal a hot stove and come back the next day for the lid. So I guess he'll fit right in with us. That's what I talked about with the carnies, promoters, the bad part of the business. And that's why people in the mainstream, although they're all hooking on from Snoop Dogg to Shaquille O'Neal, you understand where the reputation and why people sometimes were embarrassed to admit they were wrestling fans or a part of it, or people would say it fake. But John Stossel from 2020, Right, Wrong, or Indifferent, he didn't find out. Belzer, when he got hooked by Hogan, Andy Kaufman, when he got bitch slapped by Lawler on Letterman. I mean, you understand where I'm coming from, right? Be careful what you say and what you ask for. I'm going to say tread lightly when it comes to the world of professional wrestling. Back to what Lou Thez is talking about and the carnies and the whole promoter and the history and the booming of pro wrestling and the second golden era of the world of pro wrestling. A lot of people laughed at that remark, but some members got indignant. And as always happens, when someone hits too close to the truth, you know what that's all about. And we'll get onto that. But I want to hit Bert's Corner and In Your Face as the sidebar. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying the sidebars. Bert's Corner. In the 1930s, both baseball and football found it necessary to add action to the games if they wanted to keep the crowds coming in. Listen, remember, I said on the last show, I hate to finger wag. I hate to do that. I very rarely need more than this. Does anybody know what that means? That's referring to a movie with Farrah Fawcett and Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise. Cannonball Run? Anybody? Bueller? Go out and watch it. It's really funny, and you'll get what I was... this is what you get. You get comedy and entertainment on here. I'm in rare form covering this book. I'm having a lot of fun. All right, here we go. Again, Bert's Corner. What he was talking about, they want the crowds to come in, like baseball, like any other one else, like pro wrestling. So what did baseball do back then? Like we say with McGuire and Sosa and Bonds and everybody else and all the records and what it did. They juiced, the baseball was juiced up. And in 1935, pro football legalized a forward pass from anywhere behind the line of scrimmage. In those days, it seemed everything had to speed up the action if they wanted to keep the fans coming. So it's not just pro wrestling. It's not just baseball. It's not just football. You understand, and you see, if you go back and do your research and your history, this is stuff that's out there for public consumption if you do your homework and your due diligence. Let's go to In Your Face. Along with Toots Mott's, the promoter, along with Mott's innovations, several other ways to draw in the crowds were devised during the depressed 1930s. We alluded and talked about this. This is the sidebar. Tag team matches, which I love. Women's wrestling, which is the hottest thing going in the 21st century. Novelty acts like strap matches, cage matches, death matches, tornado matches, gimmicks, all different things. You're looking at one right now. And not unimportantly, the introduction of characters, wrestlers, the opposition of good guys versus bad guys, the old white hat and the black hat. It's that simple. Tell the story. Keep it simple, stupid. All these were enough to allow wrestling to survive, but prosperity would have to wait a little while. Kind of like for yours truly. But I digress. Let's get back on to Lou Thez and what he was talking about before these sidebars and the promoters and official Lou Thez webpage for that book. Hooker, and authentic wrestlers' adventures inside the bizarre world of pro wrestling. The typical NWA convention had all the backslapping found at Shriners conventions and all the backstabbing found at a reunion of the Borga family. As each promoter tried to get the better of fellow alliance members, Vince McMahon Sr. was the only major promoter not to join the NWA. He controlled the Washington, D.C. territory, which ran to Richmond, Virginia, all the way up to Lewiston, Maine, and even into Canada. As we well know, the Northeast New England area, that's why this is so pertinent to wrestling, to learn and pay who paved the way in the previous, to pay homage who came before us. I mean, it's pretty simple. And that's what they teach at PAPW. And I always say that, the Paradise Four, because they know their research. They're from the 70s, 80s, into the 90s. You understand. And that's why the guys from PAPW have gone on to be so successful and will continue to be. And again, whether who's watching this, not watching, listening, not listening, it doesn't matter to me because I'm going to say and do what I want. Either way. McWrestling, the McMahons and the WWF. We're 45 minutes in here. Even though wrestling's cast of characters always seems to be changing, there has been one constant throughout the years: the McMahon family. The patriarch of the McMahon clan was Jess McMahon, a boxing promoter who turned to wrestling. A debonair, handsome gentleman and indeterminate age. Jess had co-promoted the heavyweight championship boxing match between Jess Willard and Jack Jackson in 1915, and then joined Tex Rickard in bringing big-time boxing to Madison Square Garden, the Mecca. From there, it was an easy transition into promoting wrestling bouts, first in the Garden and then throughout the East Coast, the hotbed. This is where a lot of it started with McMahon, as we well know, and the territories. Is something going on with the lighting? Do we see an issue with the lighting? Let's check it out here. Whoa, Nelly. I can't see all the handsome memorabilia in the back, and there's only one picture of me. There's everybody else is not me. Okay, the McMahons and the WWF. Unto the second generation. His son, Vince McMahon Sr., became the second member of wrestling's first family to enter the game on the promotional side. Originally, Vince Sr. ran something called Capital Wrestling out of Washington, D.C. Get it? Now the Performance Center, the Capitol Center, a territory which covered the eastern seaboard from Virginia all the way up to Maine and as far as the Alleghenies, about the same region covered by America's first coaxial cable company, television. The near approximation of McMahon's territory in the area covered by the coax cable gave McMahon a huge advantage in selling his local bouts to the fledgling TV medium, which was desperately searching for programming to fill its screens. Vince Sr. teamed up with the old promoter, Toots Mott, who controlled the talent just as Vince controlled the TV access. Together, they became the most successful wrestling promotion in the late 40s and early 50s. Capital Wrestling's territory was so large and its operations so successful and lucrative that they didn't need the National Wrestling Alliance. And so they went on their merry way, stronger as a single entity than the NWA was as a coalition. Think about that. Think about that. That's where it all started. And why do you think Vince had the balls, the testicular fortitude to do what he did when he took over in the middle 80s and WrestleMania and NBC Saturday Night's Main Event and what we know now as 2021? You see where it all started. You see that Vince Sr. Hooked up with some promoters and had enough territory and money and talent that he didn't have to join the NWA. And to use Lou Thesz's word, a lot of the NWA back then, not the strong NWA in the 70s and 80s, NWA back then was really, some of it, with the exception of a few of the legit guys, were a bunch of shysters, a bunch of hucksters, a bunch of clowns, a bunch of douchebags, whatever it is that you want to say, scumbags that just weren't doing it the right way, NWA guys that were laughable. And I'm just going by the facts in the history. This is not opinion right here. Remember that. Capital Wrestling's rise to the top. One of Capital's first greatest attractions was Antonina Rocca, the Argentine acrobat whom they imported in the late 1940s. Then they brought in Gorgeous George from the West Coast, and he caused an instant sensation. He was, after all, a made-for-TV celebrity. McMahon and Mott carried on a Cold War with the NWA throughout the 1950s. But in 1961, the war heated up over a new wrestler on the scene, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. So let me just say that again. You see that the NWA, all the different territories, they controlled most of the country. McMahon Sr. controlled the Northeast, New England, etc., certain areas. And then you see, here comes Gorgeous George, made for TV, as they said. McMahon had control of a lot of the TV stuff, which dominated, which the NWA didn't have, which half of them were clowns anyway. They were able to stave off the NWA for years and years through the 50s and into the 60s. But again, here comes Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, the NWA and all that, and this is when things really get interesting, which led on to Ric Flair and all the different things. But here's Capital Wrestling's rise to the top and the stars that paved the way. Buddy Rogers, Antonita Rocca, Gorgeous George. Pay attention. School is still in session. We won't go much longer. We're 50 minutes up. Try not to keep it too much longer than an hour. I'm throwing out a lot of content, and I just want you guys to enjoy it. Buddy Rogers, the biggest, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, the biggest draw since Antonita Rocca and Gorgeous George, had won the NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt from Pat O'Connor at Chicago's Comiskey Park in 1961. But soon thereafter, the NWA found that their champion had gone over to Toots Mott, Vince McMahon Sr., who had taken over Rogers' bookings and was using him exclusively in the McMahon-Mott Eastern Circuit. Only on rare occasions would a magnanimous Mott consent for Rogers to wrestle for NWA promoters, allowing barely a handful of dates each month. Things got so bad that Sam Mushnick, then head of the NWA, was heard to mumble aloud to anyone who would listen. Toots controls Rogers now, and he's seeing to do it that we can't even use him on our own championships. Was that a good impression? Let me try that again. Toots controls Rogers now, and he's seeing to it we can't even use our own champion. A little better. Mushnick persuaded the venerable Lou Thez, who had first held the world championship back in 1937, and 5 times thereafter we eluded that into show 37. So he got Thez. Okay, here we go, to take on Rogers. But before we get on to that, you see it's getting very interesting here. We have a Captain Lou's Corner. Here's a great picture in here, too, of Nature Boy Buddy Rogers when he was retired from the ring actively, but still involved with Jimmy Snuka and managing Jimmy Snuka. I remember that like yesterday, Buddy Rogers and Jimmy Snuka. And, I had a chance to work with Jimmy and Jimmy Jr. On at least a handful of occasions. A true honor. All things aside from Dark Side of the Ring and what Jimmy in the end of his life, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the influence that it had on me. But I want to show you this classic picture, if you can see it. The lighting here is terrible today. We're going to have to adjust that. But there's Buddy and Jimmy. Let's get on to Captain Lou's Corner. Thanks for being here, fans. I greatly appreciate it. I've associated with Vince Sr. since 1952. And when I first started wrestling, and I would drop in at the Franklin Park Hotel in Washington to visit all the time and to receive my bookings. Well, one time during a drop-in visit, I met this little kid who was then about 11 years old. The kid kicked me in the leg. The handful would one day grow up to be Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr. And he remains a handful to this day. Am I right? Am I right? Can somebody agree with that? So let's move on. We're talking about how right here the Rocca, Gorgeous George are in the NWA. I'm sorry, the WWF. They're controlling all the territory, all the TV. So the territories of the NWA are off on their own, and the WWF is the only one, Capital Wrestling at that time, not joined in that coalition. So Mushnick, again, he recruits, like we said, Lou Thez, and he brings in Thez to take on Buddy Rogers. I just want to keep you up to date because I was sidebarred there. And bring back the belt back home. So they're trying to get the world belt out of the WWF McMahon's hand to bring it back to the NWA. And that's the whole war that's going on here. And as the television booms for the industry here in the 50s and into the early 60s. But even though Thez was to beat Rogers in one fall in January of 1963, a great year in 1963, the East Coast Circuit continued to recognize Rogers as the champion. 4 months later, in May of 1963, McMahon and Mott formed the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. That's right, May of 1963. And while not precisely worldwide, it covered only the Eastern Seaboard. It was an impressive territory with an impressive sounding name with impressive talent. Soon one of the W's was dropped and it became the WWF. Shortly thereafter, the McMahon-Mott tandem came to the end. Mott would have been on the scene since God knows when, and even God wasn't sure of when that was. He decided to pack it in. He sold his interest. Now, Toots Mott sold his interest to the WWF back to Vince Sr., then resold the interest to Gorilla Monsoon, Phil Zacco, and Arnold Skolin, keeping a majority interest in the new entity for himself. So that's what Vince Sr. did. So it was Vince Sr. and Toots Mott. I know I got a little tongue-tied there, the whole Bully Ray reference. I'm going to not be redundant. Mott's and McMahon, WWF versus the NWA. We know that story. Mott's decided to get out. Vince Sr. bought him out. As Vince, because who knows, threw him out, bought him out, whatever you want to call it. That's when, in 1963, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation was started. In turn, Mott's out, McMahon Sr. buys it out. He, in turn, sells the interest to the people that ended up being the legends, especially through the 70s and 80s, and people that we know even into the 90s that are Hall of Famers now, and that would be one Gorilla Monsoon, the Golden Boy Arnold Skolin, and, of course, Phil Zacco. To keep it a majority of interest, though, McMahon was no dummy. Sr. was no dummy. He may have not been Vince, who wanted to rule the world like Dr. Evil, but Vince, you see, was smart and got true wrestling men. It doesn't get much better than bringing in Arnie Skolin, and of course, the irresistible force meets the immovable object. That would be one Gorilla Monsoon, who I've also was a huge influence in my broadcasting and my character and what I tried to do on the certain circuits that I worked for. So again, this to me is as enjoyable as bringing it to you. And I know I've got tongue-tied. It's okay. It's okay. You understand. Do it in slow motion. Here's another in your face. And this is the articles that I refer to when I say that. You see the sidebar there, correct? Disregard the nail polish from my granddaughter, please. Disregard. Nice glass, though, isn't it? In your face. The Worldwide Wrestling Federation may have picked a name that presumed to encompass a border territory that it really controlled, but that's wrestling for you, extravagant and clams. Clams. Extravagant claims are part of its nature. After all, as a writer Joe Jarrett said, Gorgeous George wasn't really very gorgeous either. So the whole point of In Your Face there, a Worldwide Wrestling Federation, was a great name. Sounded like it covered everything, but it really wasn't worldwide at that point. Just like Gorgeous George said he was gorgeous and he scared the rats off cheesecake. He made onions cry. So the WWF may have picked a name that presumed to encompass a broader territory than it really controlled. But that's wrestling for you. Extravagant claims are part of its nature. That's the bottom line from that. Before we move on here, because there's been a lot of chicanery in this episode, but filled, I want to make sure that I put this in here on show number 38, live to tape. And don't forget to follow me on all social media platforms. We'll wrap it up very soon. A new McMahon twist. We're here reviewing a complete idiot's guide to pro wrestling. We are in Chapter 3, the guide that holds it all together. We're covering this crazy world called pro wrestling, and now I'm going to get on to a new McMahon twist. In 1983, Vince sold his interest in the WWF to his son. Here it is. Here's where it all changed. Vince Jr. What followed was a nationwide wrestling blitzkrieg, a take-no-prisoners war of expansion that would radically change the world of professional wrestling. Vince Jr. was able to voyage Columbus-like into the territories of other promoters because of the drawing of cable TV and the production values made possible by another innovation, videotape. His theory was, and you see that he just sold it all to NBC, Peacock, Universal, the whole 9 yards. His theory was what worked in the Northeast could be exported and made to work nationally and internationally. So he declared war on the other promoters and invade or bought up all their territories. This is Back to the Future. This is just the beginning. This is show number 38. We are going to continue to cover this on almost a nearly day by day basis and break it down one by one until however it takes to get through this, because I feel it to be important. Historic, paves the way, pays homage. It's great content. It's learning. It's education mixed with comedy, entertainment, variety, and the Guardian of Chaos twist and what I've done in this business and industry. I can't thank you enough for being here. We're right at an hour. I'm going to read up a couple of different sidebars. We're going to call it a day, but we're going to be right back for episode number 39 very shortly. The goal is to get to episode 50, show number 50, if you will, as soon as possible. And you're going to see all the different continuations. I greatly appreciate it. I love you guys. You're a big part of what I do here. And again, I'm here, especially the guys over at the show, to put you over, to entertain you, because this is what we do, especially in this day and age. Let me get off the soapbox. Here we go with another WrestleMania sidebar. Quote from Vince McMahon Jr. My dad would have never sold me his end of that company. Well, let me do it that. Can I do it in a McMahon voice? Should I try it? Try a little something here. I'm not big on voices. You know, I've been in a couple movies. I've been on national TV. Let me try this. Down in the bunker, you know, to throw nasal. Let's try it. This is Vince McMahon Jr. talking. My dad would have never sold me his end of that company, nor for that matter would the other stockholders have followed if they knew what I was going to do. He just thought I was going to continue to operate in the Northeast and respect the other promotions and their territories. Oh my God, now you've just angered half the promoters in the business. Vince Jr. said that wasn't a very good imitation. I don't really care. Vince Jr. had his own plans, so after he bought out his dad's partners, he began syndicating his television programming into Los Angeles, then St. Louis, then throughout the country. Vince McMahon, you're fired. Is that Trump or McMahon? Maybe they got that from each other. While he was carrying out his scorched earth policy, Vince Jr. was vulnerable. We did it all with mirrors. It was all cash flow. Had these promoters known that I didn't have any money, they could have killed us. But the point was, they didn't know. And even if they had, it's doubtful that the disorganized organization, say that again, disorganized organization known as the NWA could have held Vince Jr. off. Back to what Fez said. Rather than banding together to repel his invasion, they bickered amongst themselves and kept their heads firmly planted in the sand, or up their ass, whatever you want to say, while Vince Jr. planted his WWF flag across the country, changing the face of professional wrestling forever. Of the 20 regional promoters operating throughout the country in 1984, fewer than 5 remained by 1989. Think about that. That is something here as we're over an hour. I really don't want to go much longer, but I'd like to finish up this certain page in the Captain Lou's Corner. This is a WrestleMania brief, not a sidebar, but just a column here and the glue that holds it all together. If there was any one moment that defined the success of the WWF cementing its position at the top of the wrestling ladder, it was WrestleMania. Truth to tell, Vince Jr. had actually been thinking about it for a long time as a new way to put the WWF on the map. The idea had its roots in McMahon's perception of wrestling. He knew that the WWF was in the entertainment business, much like Broadway and Hollywood were. And so, borrowing from their example, he began planning attractive main events and bringing in celebrities who were, in his word, hip. Who could add to the event and help make it into an entertainment, putting asses in the seats, making money, as I always say. Soon, Vince Jr. began pulling in together all the elements for WrestleMania 1. the big one. I'm getting chills right now. Bringing in the likes of Hulk Hogan, Sergeant Slaughter, the Iron Sheik, and celebrities such as Muhammad Ali, Liberace, and Billy Martin. But Vince Jr. has always been open to new ideas. He encourages his staff to give him creative input. I don't think so anymore. I don't think that was necessary for me to throw that in there, do you? But I did. It was in the atmosphere that I went to Vince with an idea. Wendy Richter versus the Fabulous Moolah. Though in reality, it became me, Captain Lou, versus Cyndi Lauper. Unbelievable. Girls just want to have fun. We're not going to get into that now. We're going to save that for the next show. I'm going to follow it up here by thanking you, cutting it right off, and finishing it off from my mentor and the biggest influence in my life in the career of Chaos Corner and the guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, the manager, and that's Captain Lou's Corner. But man, stay tuned for what's about to come on the next show. The idea came to McMahon, he said, while he was on vacation with his wife, Linda. According to McMahon, he turned to her and said, "We're going to do a big promotion and we're going to close circuit it all over the country." There was no pay-per-view back then, as we all know, especially me being in that era. And we're going to call it WrestleMania. We know that Howard Finkel, the true story is, coined the term WrestleMania. For the record, the legendary ring announcer, the Fink, Howard Finkel, coined the phrase WrestleMania. I'm going to try my Vince McMahon voice one more time. God damn it! Captain Lou's Corner to finish up show number 38, live to tape, same day coverage. I hope you enjoyed it. Here from the bunker, I'll say that to say this. Don't you dare miss it. Captain Lou's Corner, and then I'm out here at Chaos Corner. I'm coming. Don't go anywhere, not yet. Captain Lou's Corner. The idea came to McMahon, and we know this is a fallacy now. That's right, fallacy, because the Fink coined WrestleMania. But I want to try the Vince McMahon voice one more time. The idea came to McMahon, he said, while he was on vacation with his wife, Linda. According to McMahon, he turned to her and said, "We're going to do a big promotion. We're going to do closed circuit all over the country, and we're going to call it WrestleMania." Was that a little better? I think that was a little better on the Vince voice. But listen, I'm going to close it off here on Chaos Corner. Howard Finkel, if you listen to the guys that I know, in the circles that I know, somebody do some research again, you come up with the answers, I'll get you the 8x10 autograph Hall of Fame photos. All right, fans, thanks for being here. Signing off, Chaos Corner. I'll say that to say this. Don't you dare miss it.